The collapse of Marsh Supermarkets, I believe, is directly responsible for long-term decline in certain central Indiana neighborhoods. So if you don't remember Marsh Supermarkets, they were introduced around the 1930s, and they were a great supermarket here in Indiana. They expanded all over in Indiana, actually, and Ohio. In the 2000s, they were just an awesome grocery store. If you remember back in the day, you could go rent videos in Marsh. You could get some good donuts. They had the best breadsticks. Marsh was everywhere. Now, around 2004, maybe really even earlier, when Meijer started coming into the central Indiana area and Kroger really started to expand, they started feeling a lot of pressure. In 2006, they were purchased by Sun Capital, which is kind of like private equity, and their job was to revitalize the stores because, again, that competition was really hurting them. Well, that didn't work, and starting in 2007, the stores started closing all the way up to 2017 when Marsh filed bankruptcy. So if you remember some of the articles and stories about Marsh's demise, even before Sun Capital purchased Marsh, they were in bad financial trouble. Specifically, the reports that came out when Don Marsh, the CEO, had used company funds that paid pensions for employees, for travel, real estate, for his own personal relationships, gains, you name it. But in the end, $80 million was left unpaid to employees for pensions, and $340 million was left unpaid to creditors. Of course, closing these stores hurt communities so badly. Many of these communities I'm going to talk about, Marsh was their only grocery store. Not only did, they lose jobs, a lot of these communities lost access to pharmacies, because remember, Marsh had pharmacies. They lost access, again, a lot of them to food, because in those neighborhoods, Marsh was the only store. And now what has happened since 2017, and we're talking almost 10 years, some of these buildings are still vacant. And yes, some of them have been used for other businesses like Spirit Halloween, liquor stores. Some of them have been turned into other grocery stores, etc. But let me remind you what vacant buildings do to an area over time, because Marsh would have been the anchor store in any plaza, right? Okay, let's take Irvington Plaza, for example. On East Washington Street, that used to be a thriving plaza. Believe it or not, it really was. The plaza had Marsh, it had a flea market, which was really popular, a Dairy Queen, it had a video store, it had Little Caesars, it had, whatever. Over time, some of the businesses changed, but it was a thriving plaza. And when Marsh decided to cease operations in 2017, that left many of these Marsh buildings abandoned with no plan. Yes, Kroger said they would buy certain Marshes, but that plan fell through. I'm sure other groceries looked into possibly getting into those buildings, but for whatever reason, these buildings, a lot of them were never filled. So what happens when a plaza has an abandoned building? Well, number one, some of the other businesses in a plaza, they start going out of business because they're not getting the traction from the main store in the plaza. Number two, it draws crime. Empty buildings draw in crime. I'm sorry, they do. Another thing, when there are vacant buildings, it brings down the value in the area. No one who lives in an area wants vacant buildings. And along with crime, unfortunately, it attracts homelessness, etc. And I believe, I'm not positive, but I believe that's what happened to the Irvington Marsh. So it was abandoned from 2017 all the way to, I think, 2024. And I believe it caught fire 2024. Maybe people were in there trying to stay warm. I don't blame them, but that's what happened. And now the building is demolished. Still using Irvington as this example, that Marsh, though the building is gone, the entire plaza is now vacant. Let's talk about some of the places where Marsh was, where, things have declined. Irvington Plaza, we've already talked about that. Off the top of my head, Eagledale, I believe that one's still vacant. Arlington. And again, some of these have other stores in there, but they're not as desirable. We had a Marsh on 96 and Fishers, and honestly, it's been so many different things, but that plaza really hasn't thrived in a very long time. 75th and Shadeland, that's a perfect example. That used to be a thriving plaza. Now it's not. You've got Rockville and Lyndhurst, 21st and Post. There was one in Lawrence on Franklin Road. There was one at East Washington in German Church. There was one at Carmel at North Meridian. That's now a Godby Furniture, but that was a thriving plaza. I think about it and it's really sad because this corporation built these communities up around the area, and with their demise, they are responsible for a lot of the collapse. And I wonder, what does the Marsh family think about this when they drive by the abandoned plazas? Do I blame the Marsh family, like the heirs? No. But the CEO is still alive. Some of the VPs of the company are still alive and out there, the O'Malleyas. And it's like, what do you think when you drive by these plazas and see that Marsh Clothing is really directly responsible for the demise of some of these communities?